So the ego enters so that we experience duality. And
in duality, but yeah, in separation from the source that created us.
And then after it dissolves, after it's separated, what do we experience? Non-duality?
Yeah. After it dissolves, I'm going to give you, I'm going to speak from my experience, but I can't speak for every single person in the whole, because like I can give you common denominators of ego. When it's there, I can give you common denominators of neo, or when there's no ego there. But I can't say every single person like this, because equally how there's many points of views, there's still going to be many points of views. But let's say because we're missing a lot in between, because there's the ego entering, but then there's the majority of the life with the ego for a lot of people. But then let's just skip to the ego not being there permanently, because there's times when people does internal work in between where the ego can be there and cannot be there, or it's not there and then boom, another personality, new part surfaces. They haven't done the work, and all of a sudden, so that can happen too. And people can get to points where there's the neo's there and the ego's not. Doesn't mean it's enlightenment. Enlightenment is there's no more ego cross context, because so much, 105,000, 102 hours. Let me double check my math. I just want to be technical. 105,000, 120 hours of conscious connecting with the divine, dissolving the ego, confronting fear, letting the nervous system fully experience what's ever there while living life and actually fulfilling and going towards the purpose. Like confronting everything all the time, always. 105,000, 120 hours of that. But let's say the ego completely falls off, dissolves, it collapses in on itself. That's what's called enlightenment. Enlightenment is different than God realization, different than self-realization. Those are three separate things. But if we're talking about enlightenment, then it's bad news for the ego. Let's just put it that way. And the ego sometimes, when I talk about this, doesn't like it. And it is what it is. But there's no ability to run away from anything anymore. If the ego doesn't exist, does that equally mean a person's just like Jesus can walk on water and shoot lightning bolts through his fingers? No. Jesus was Jesus. Buddha was Buddha. Other people are like other people. There's no two aspects of the divine in this way that's the same. But there's also similarities. But there's no ability to resist or run away ever again. And suffering, human suffering, is only resistance. Suffering equals resistance. And then you might ask, well, what is human suffering? Well, I mean, it's pretty obvious what human suffering is, but why is human suffering a thing? Why did God create it as a thing? Because suffering is the greatest catalyst for awakening. If somebody suffers enough, they're going to want a solution. They're going to want to find a way out. But most time at the beginning, it's the ego trying to escape the suffering, which creates more suffering, because whatever we resist persists. But if we suffer enough and we realize all the attempts that we tried doing independent from source to try to evade or escape suffering fails fundamentally, then what happens if we just go into that suffering and just say, I'm going to do the one thing I have not tried to do. I'm going to go into it. I'm going to embrace it. I'm going to become best friends with this suffering eternally. I don't even care if for the rest of all existence, eternally, that it's just me and the suffering. I'm going to hang out with them. I'm going to become best friends with them. I'm going to smooch it. I'm going to put my favorite coat around it. I'm going to give it tea. I'm going to massage its feet. And that's like something that's extremely rare. And that's pre-enlightenment, let's just say, pre-ego dissolving. And then what happens is whatever's accepted is connected. The ego will even listen to this and just say, I accept everything. I accept it now. I accept it now. Accepting isn't a decision. Accepting is an experience. And most people, I think your screen went blank for a second.
Oh, yeah, it's probably the camera got overactivated back. And on the fan,
I'll hold the light for you.
Okay. All right.
Perfect. So the ego it will do everything in its ability to run away. It will do everything in its ability to fight. But then when that doesn't work, then it will accept, the ego will accept the dissolving of the ego to only lead you on a wild goose chase. And then it becomes more like, it's kind of like up a pyramid. Like the higher you go up to, I like the pyramid as an example because there's more people on the bottom of the pyramid. There's less people at the top of the pyramid. There's more poverty on the bottom. There's more wealth at the top. There's more separation from source at the bottom. There's more connection, oneness at the top. And at the top is permanently connected. But the higher we go up the pyramid or into the funnel or closer towards enlightenment, then the ego becomes more and more subtle, more and more subtle, more and more subtle, more and more subtle. And it requires deeper levels of awareness. But once the ego is no longer there, there's no more suffering. Meaning, there's no more resistance. And whatever suffering was there, whatever was being resisted is now fully experienced. And that will take some time because how much of our life do we resist things? Now, if we no longer have the ability to resist things, we have to feel the things that we didn't have the ability to fully experience. And then there'll be a period where we bliss or are feeling great, but it's not necessarily becoming a monk because monks can do this, but we need people in the world to do this. And then beyond that, there's going to be different programs and parts that are going to come up that were created where there was an ego that still needs to be experienced. The nervous system still, like, you can't cheat karma, you can't cheat the nervous system. There's efficiency, but there's no shortcut. You can't offboard it to other people, so there's no ego, there's no more lies, there's no resisting, there's no running away. There's only experiencing whatever's in the moment, no matter how painful or how uncomfortable it is. But pain and suffering are not the same thing. Pain, I could take a hammer and hit one of my thumbs or fingers and it would be painful, but it would crescendo and then it would decrescendo. Suffering is, I'm so so much pain, and now I'm a victim for it. And do you see how much pain I'm in? Like, that's what suffering is. And like, remember that one time 15 years ago when I hit my thumb with a hammer, and just identifying with it. And that's a metaphor how people, identify being a victim and things like that.